Hey guys, it's Coach Goodrich here with another 8th grade American history video. This is going to be Unit 7, Part 1 of Unit 7. Here, you know what, I'm going to add it onto the inscription right now. Part 7, Part 1. There you go. That looks a little bit better, doesn't it? So make sure you have your notes out and ready, and here we go. Essential question: how is the Gilded Age something that we still deal with today? And number 2, what was the overall impact of the closing of the American frontier? So you pause the video here, write those down. We'll be answering these questions as we move through the unit. The Gilded Age. The Gilded Age was a phrase created by Mark Twain. Gilded is a jewelry term. It means looks shiny or good on the outside, but is corrupt or dirty on the inside. In jewelry, it means it's a cheaper metal that's enclosed with a more wealthy metal to make it look more expensive. So, let's talk about some more things in regards to that. The major legislation, the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, said no company could purposely undersell the competition for the intent of creating a monopoly. Everybody's played the board game Monopoly before. So I trust is like a monopoly, or it's a company that's on its way to becoming a monopoly. Monopoly is when you have one major company that controls all of the interests, the vast majority of the interests in a field. That would be like one phone company, that would be AT&T. You know, just say AT&T buys out every other company. They could charge however much they wanted for cell phones and for plans because they're the only ones that are offering it. Same thing with gas, same thing with milk. So we'll talk a little bit more about monopolies as we're working our way through. So let's talk about some of these, what we call captains of industry, otherwise on one side, sometimes known as robber barons on the other, 4 of the richest guys in American history. Number 1 is Cornelius Vanderbilt. He's known as the Commodore. He quit school at age 11. He ran a railroad. He was worth $400 million when he died, and said, "Laws? What laws? I have power." He is going to also start a university, the Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, and their mascot is the Commodores, named after him. Andrew Carnegie was a Scotch immigrant to the United States, also ran a railroad, but made his wealth in steel. He mastered the Bessemer procedure, was worth $750 million when he died. He was a great philanthropist. The Bessemer procedure was a way of strengthening steel to make refining steel, to make it better, make it stronger, make it lighter. He started off the philanthropy movement, which is basically wealthy people, or people that could afford it, giving money to charities and to the poor in order to help out the world around them. J.P. Morgan. He bought the steel company from Carnegie when he sold it. He created a U.S. steel conglomerate, which is a monopoly. He would control 10% of the nation's wealth. He'd be worth $22 billion when he dies, but made most of his money through banking. J.P. Morgan's still one of the largest investment firms in the country. And then the wealthiest guy, not only in American history, but probably in world history, John D. Rockefeller. Everything in New York City is named after this guy, because he donated money to help it get built. He controlled 90% of the nation's oil through the form of his company, which was Standard Oil Company. He gave lots of his money away, a great philanthropist as well, and would be worth $340 billion today. So, a nice little sum. Let's talk about some of the major ideas of the 19th century, late 19th century. You got social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. In that case, the fittest business will survive. You know, we've talked about Charles Darwin and his theories of evolution in past years. This is taking that and applying it to the business and to the economic sense. If a business is bad, it will eventually go out of business and will be replaced by a better one. So you have that idea contrasted with the idea of the gospel of wealth. Economically successful people have a responsibility to share their fortune with their community in order to help out, whether through just private donations or through charities. They have a responsibility to help. So it's interesting. Most people usually fall into one of these two lines right here. A lot of those guys that we just talked about fall into both in some extent. We're going to do some comparing and contrasting later on. There we go. A couple more things. How to succeed. There are a series of books or pamphlets written by an author named Horatio Alger. where we get the word algorithm from. How do you better yourself? If you work hard, you get an education, have a good attitude, be determined, and you will succeed. He's the guy that kind of came up with that, the idea of the American dream. You can come from nothing to having a lot if you're willing to work hard, if you're willing to get educated, have a good attitude. We've all heard these things from our parents or from our grandparents or from our teachers and coaches before. And then materialism, the idea that the greatest things in life, the greatest things to be gathered or accumulated are material things. Cars, jewels, homes, pretty much money and things you can buy with money. And that's where you find your happiness. Thomas Nast is pictured to the right. He's a famous editorial cartoonist in the 1800s. He draws cartoons for a magazine called Harper's Weekly. He's responsible for bringing down a very famous crime lord named Boss Tweed, a very crooked politician in New York City. He is the head of Tammany Hall, the Democratic Party political machine in New York City. Had a various amount of titles in the city premises, but he was pretty much just a gangster. He would steal millions of dollars, between 75 and 200 million from the New York City government. Eventually, he would be convicted and go to jail, and Thomas Nast's political cartoons that attacked him helped catch him. Like this one. So let's break down political cartoons. Who is depicted in this cartoon? Guess what? That's Boss Tweed. What is his head? It's a money bag. What does the cartoon represent? What is the only thing on Boss Tweed's mind? Money. Boom. What is this man standing on right here? Looks like he's standing on a railroad track, right? Who do you think he is? Maybe the Commodore, Cornelius Vanderbilt. Looks like that. What's he holding in his hands? Like puppeteer strings, marionette strings. And what does this cartoon mean? He is controlling the railroad industry. Hence, he is controlling commerce and trade in the country. All right. Look, we've got the Greek god Atlas here. Who's carrying the world in this place? Mr. Morgan as a new Atlas says, just must be J.P. Morgan. What is drawn on the world? All these different, looks like factories and trade ships, and businesses drawn up all over the place. What does it mean? J.P. Morgan and his money are carrying the world. They're carrying the world economy on his back. Here you go. Another one. This is the Senate building. People's interest is closed, as you can see, so not allowed inside their own Senate building. This is the Senate of the monopolies, by the monopolists, and for the monopolists. And you things like Copper Trust, Standard Oil Trust, Iron Trust, Sugar Trust, Tin Trust, Coal, Paper Bag Trust, working at the bosses of the Senate. Who is controlling the Senate? Who's controlling the government? The oil companies, the trusts, the monopolies. There you go. Right there for you. You can pause and write this down if you need to. Boom. Who is the man pictured? You can see it on his collar right there. John D. Rockefeller. Look, he is so much bigger than everybody else. Size always indicates importance in art. What is he holding? Right here, it looks like he is holding the United States, one of the federal government buildings, the Supreme Court, perhaps the White House. Behind it, you see the White House, you see you see the Capitol building behind it. What's coming out of these? It looks like an oil refinery. So what does the cartoon say? Rockefeller controls everything in the United States government because Rockefeller controls the oil, which makes the country go. All right, mini quiz. Here we go. I know it's in a weird spot. We're going to actually continue on with the video as we're going through, because there's some things I want to get to as we're talking about the Gilded Age and populism as a whole. So mini quiz number 1, so go ahead and answer it. You pause the video, answer these right now, and make sure that you answer it online as well on Google Classroom. We're going to continue on. All right, the populist movement. So in spite of all of these big businesses and monopolies and corruption, we have this populism and down-home political movement in the late 1800s that want to reform for the farmers and workers who were responsible for really doing much of the heavy lifting and labor for the country. What did populism want? It wanted a personal income tax for each person, direct election of our senators, which eventually did happen, an 8-hour standard workday, working 9 to 5, immigration restriction, wanted more jobs for Americans, the free silver movement, or backing our currency with silver instead of with gold, called silverites, and 1 6-year term for the president. Why was populism so popular? There was an economic depression in 1893 that specifically hurt Eastern industrial workers and farmers. These workers began to work together in the form of unions in order to earn more workers' rights, safer conditions, better pay, better benefits. So why don't we hear about populism anymore? The Democratic Party of the 1900s adopted many of their ideals, and as economic prosperity returned, many of the people forgot about the problems that came with the Depression of 1893. Leaders of populism. The most famous guy was a guy named William Jennings Bryan, or W.J. Bryan. Ran for president 4 times and never won. Ran in 1896, 1900, and 1908 as a Democrat. Lost in 1896 and 1900 to William McKinley. Lost in 1908 to William Howard Taft. And he's known as a great commoner, a great speaker for the common man. Also is this silver trumpet. Now, one of my favorite parts of this unit is we get to watch The Wizard of Oz, because a lot of scholars agree that The Wizard of Oz is an allegory for populism. Allegory is a series of stories and tales that stand for something else. See it all the time. You see lots of allegories of the Bible and Shakespeare. This is one in slightly more recent history. So it uses animals or people to represent a concept or idea. Many scholars say that The Wizard of Oz is an allegory for populism. So let's break it down. The book, The Wizard of Oz, was published by L. Frank Baum in 1900. Becomes a movie in 1939, the first color movie in history. It's about a girl named Dorothy trying to get home from a strange land called Oz. She gets the assistance from 3 companions who also seek help from the wizard. So let's talk about who represents whom. Dorothy represents every man or the people. She's from Kansas, and she hopes the wizard will show her the way back home to Kansas. There's no place like home. The Scarecrow represents farmers. He hopes the wizard will give him a brain or knowledge. Many felt farmers were not intelligent and working hard for very little gain. He's represented by that. The Tin Man, made of metal. Tin Man represents the industrial workers. He hopes the wizard will give him a heart. Then he saw the industrial workers as dehumanized from no work during the 1893 Depression. The Depression is represented by him being rusted when they find him. The Lion, or Cowardly Lion. The Cowardly Lion represents William Jennings Bryan, the leader of the populist movement. He hopes to get courage from the wizard. The lion retreats into the forest to show Bryan's defeat and ultimate demise from politics. The Wizard. The Wizard is the President of the United States, presumably Grover Cleveland. He was president from 1885 to 1889 and from 1893 to 1897. Only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. The Emerald City represents Washington, D.C., home of the president. The Witches. The witches represent the capitalists or bankers who are really in charge of everything. They're the ones that kind of make everything work, make everything move. The Wicked Witch of the East is killed by Dorothy's house after the storm. The Wicked Witch of the West is melted. Glinda, pictured above, is the Good Witch of the North. The Munchkins. The Munchkins represent all the rest of the common people that must work for the capitalists. They were in bondage for many years to the Wicked Witch of the East until Dorothy kills her and frees them. The Slippers. This is important. The slippers are actually silver in the book, representing the free silver movement of populism. They're just red on screen because it was designed to show up better. As the first color movie, the red really popped. They come off when Dorothy returns to Kansas to show that the free silver movement fails. The Yellow Brick Road. The Yellow Brick Road represents the gold standard that populism was against. Oz is the abbreviation for ounce, which is the measurement for gold and other precious metals. The Flying Monkeys, working for the witches, represent Native Americans at that time. They were good, but forced to do bad by the witches. Likewise, Native Americans felt trapped by wealthy capitalists who forced them into working for them. And then Toto, probably just a dog. Could have represented laughter and fun. Dorothy needed Toto to keep from turning dumb, heartless, and scared. And that, I believe, is where we're going to leave it off for today, guys. Really appreciate it. And do that mini quiz and get complete on Google Classroom, and we will continue this later on.